Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Hungary is under intense pressure ahead of its parliamentary election. New allegations that sensitive EU discussions may have been passed to Russia are adding to already deep tensions over Ukraine, sanctions, and Viktor Orbán's place in Europe. That also matters for Poland, where talks of historic friendship with Hungary now collides with growing security distrust. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack what this all means for Hungary, for the EU, and for Poland, the Polish-Hungarian ties, is István Hegedűs, chairman of the Hungarian Europe Society. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Thanks for the invitation.
So looking at this newest scandal, how politically damaging are these Russian leak allegations for Viktor Orbán just weeks before the election?
Well, it's important for the opposition and especially TISA party and Péter Magyar that this has become an issue, and it's going on to be an issue until the day of the election. So, of course, what matters, who can actually dictate the agenda. And this is an issue which is good for the opposition, of course. So if it's true that Péter Szijjártó, the foreign minister of the Orbán regime, of the Orbán government, usually and regularly called Sergei Lavrov during European meetings, EU meetings, when the foreign affairs ministers met together, and he reported him every time again and again. This is a huge scandal, of course. We don't know whether it's true or not, but it doesn't really matter so much. But when Orbán and his friends talk about the sovereignty of Hungary, they always mean Brussels, that the opposition is financed by the European Union institutions, whatever it means. And now it's a clear counter-argument that Orbán and his foreign minister have so close links to Russia, what is really a sort of treason, what the opposition party might emphasize.
Right. Do you think that's going to significantly impact his support with his base, though? Because accusations of the Orbán government being close ties to Russia isn't really something very relatively new. Do you think that this is going to significantly impact that? Or do you think that this will actually help perhaps sway the voters that are still undecided?
You're right. It's nothing new, but maybe it's more relevant, or it's maybe more brutal that to imagine that Szijjártó calls Lavrov every time from the rooms of the European Council or the European EU Foreign Affairs meetings. So it's not new. It might not change the mindset of most of the people who know very well whom to vote for 3 weeks before the elections. But it might somehow, help some people who might be still hesitant whom to vote at the very end. But I agree, this is not the number one issue, but it's important for the opposition to keep this issue on the agenda.
Right. And of course, we are very close to the election already. But if this thing is confirmed, do you think that this will be a temporary scandal, something that would blow over? Or do you think that this would actually have long-term consequences that hurts trust within the European Union?
Yes, if Viktor Orbán wins again on the 12th of April, this gossip and this charge against his government might remain an issue. I think that all of the partners, other ministers and governments in general, do not like this scandal at all. And what you can hear from everywhere, that most of the EU partners are not really surprised. So they, as you also mentioned, they have already known that there is a special relationship between Russia and Hungary. But in case you find a sort of evidence, that's another story then. And it might have very real, even legal consequences. And the mistrust against Hungary might grow. But we don't know. If Orbán loses, there will be a totally new chapter within the EU, the role of Hungary within the EU after the election.
All right, speaking of Hungary's role within the European Union, because of course, from an outside looking in, that's one of the big topics, the geopolitics and all of that. But if we go back to the election, how is the domestic audience perceiving this? In other words, do you think that the voters are very focusing on Hungary's place in Europe as an issue, or do you think some of the more domestic stuff are the things that's going to top the agenda when it comes to this election cycle?
The two competing parties have a very different agenda. So Tisza and Péter Magyar himself are talking about domestic issues, healthcare, economy, inflation, corruption, attacking the Orbán regime's 16 years in power. Whilst Orbán and his men and women in government, they emphasize how important person is Orbán to protect Hungary from external threats. What happened today, for example, the meeting of the patriots, his closest allies within the European Union, far-right leaders, including Marine Le Pen, who arrived to Budapest today, these politicians all emphasize the important role of Orbán at European and global levels. And they emphasize that they want to change the European Union, they want to occupy the EU and form it following their own wish and desires. So there are two campaigns going on. They don't talk to each other. And the real issue is what you have asked, whether most of the people want to focus on foreign affairs, or what Tisza is arguing in favor, that you should listen and check your money, how much you get, how much you earn, and what you have received during the 16 years in the Orbán regime, politically and economically.
All right. If following that line of logic, like you mentioned, Peter Magyar runs on a lot of domestic issues, while Orbán focuses on what he calls external threat, kind of taking this also to a foreign policy perspective. Do you think that this scandal, if utilized by the opposition to draw attention to actually the more international stage, that would actually immobilize Orbán's base even more?
I don't think so, because you know, all of those who really accept the rhetoric of Orbán, the attacks against Brussels, or the Orbánist ideology about a sovereign Hungary, and somehow accepted this special relationship between Putin and Orbán, and look at Ukraine not as the victim, but as a sort of aggressor in this war. So all of these people have already decided, I think, that they would vote for Orbán. Now the fight is for a small segment of the voters who might be still the undecided people. Now for them, this, what we have heard, that Hungary and the Hungarian foreign affairs minister calls the Russian foreign minister every day and reports him, I think this is not something what might seduce them by Fidesz, just the opposite. So it's not a good topic for Orbán at all at the moment. That's my assumption.
Right. Now, from the Polish perspective, recently we saw a Polish president visiting Hungary on a historic Friendship Day. But do you think with all these scandals going on, and well, with the traditional Polish-Hungarian relationship, do you think that that still holds with Hungary being diverging that far from the European consensus?
It was a little bit a surprise that Polish President Nawrocki arrived to Budapest. It was very unclear whether he would come because of so close relationship between Orbán and Putin. And there is a sort of consent in Poland that they criticize and do not accept Putin's war against Ukraine. So Nawrocki made a very risky trip to Budapest, but that's the Polish problem, and he was attacked by the ruling party. So there is an internal partisan fighting between the two blocs, the more centrist liberal, conservative, and the very right-wing blocs in Poland. But as for Hungary, I think it doesn't help much Orbán either, because the traditional Polish-Hungarian friendship has been ruined by Orbán because of his friendship to Putin. Even if today Nawrocki came to Budapest, you cannot really show that this traditional friendship has been repaired just by one visit. We know that the Visegrad cooperation, which includes not only Poland and Hungary, but Slovakia as well, has been ruined also. So this might not, again, change the mindset of most of the voters in Hungary anymore.
Right. What about the endorsement from the U.S. administration, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance? Do you think that this would have any weight when it comes to the election results?
I still think that this current U.S. administration led by Donald Trump is not really popular in Hungary, just like in most of the EU countries or European countries, or worldwide, I might say, in most of the countries. So even if J.D. Vance comes, what is very likely early April, it might show that, again, Orbán is a very important political figure at global level. But I'm not sure whether most of the people would applaud to this visit, because J.D. Vance and Trump are not popular in Hungary. Again, it might help the self-confidence of the Fidesz voters, but might not increase the number of voters for Fidesz before the election.
All right, so it does seem like this competition is being ran on many fronts, not just domestic, but also foreign policy. We'll have to see how that shapes out. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.